Hey there, everybody. How are we doing this fine Thursday evening, afternoon, something like that? Good to hear, Esther. Welcome back. Good to see you. Hey, Laura, what's happening? Oh my gosh, we got a couple folks testing this weekend. Well, at least Karen is. But yeah. Nice, perfect, Lauren. That's awesome. I like that. Are you sure you want to take this email from at the AMSA? That's pretty awesome. Well, not AMSA, WMC. Yeah, exactly. Or MCAT application system, but same. Cool. Welcome, everybody. So, of course, for those of you testing in the very near future, good luck. I'm glad that you are here. This is one of those things that is super high yield on the test, and so it's nice to kind of hit these major topics right before we dive into the real thing. But a little background, remember this is Endocrine 2, so we do move through things a little bit faster than we do in Endocrine 1. So it is nice to have a little bit of background in terms of general structure, peptide versus steroid hormones and all that kind of stuff. We covered that in your first endo class. But today we're going to get more specific to different types of systems, so endocrinology systems. I know generally speaking, when you cover endocrine, we really kind of talk about like gland by gland. Instead, in this class, we're going to mostly focus on system by system and talk about, well, one thing we'll probably talk about a lot because it's associated with lots of systems. And you guess what endocrine gland is associated with lots of different systems? There's two, actually, I would say. Kind of, two. Yeah, anterior pituitary for sure, Lauren. We get into that big time, as well as the hypothalamus, which is the king dog that tells the anterior pituitary what to do. But so yeah, we talk a lot about the hypothalamus and pituitaries, plural, today. And so exactly as Renee says, we're going to group them together according to systems and functionality to give you the big take-home of how all this stuff relates. Let's see this here. Oh, no! Pen tool fail. I'm going to try to unplug something real quick and plug it back in, and hopefully it will work. There we go. Perfect. That's the thing with computers. If it's ever broken, just turn it off, turn it back on. It usually fixes itself. And so I guess these electronic pen tools work the exact same way. All right, so as we said, we're going to differentiate two major methods in which hormones affect homeostasis. We'll go through, of course, the different types of axes that are focused on the anterior pituitary and hypothalamus. We'll also talk about hormone levels involved in homeostasis of water, calcium, glucose as well. And then we'll get into the reproduction stuff, primarily females, a little bit of male too. The hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis. And kind of talk about the menstrual cycle, reproduction, Rohini's fave. It is, oh my gosh, so much stuff going on, so we'll definitely spend a lot of time talking about that. One thing that's actually between these two here is a passage. We're not going to cover the passage that's smack dab in the middle. We'll assign that one as homework. There's a lot of stuff we have to cover today, so in order to do the passage, we would have to rush too much, and it just isn't worth it. But so you will have that one as homework. We'll give you the full answers, explanations, and guide for that. We will end class today kind of going through a little list that's associated with each gland. Mostly it'll be a little checklist. And so if you know that you're still working on memorizing different, glands and hormones and all that kind of stuff, it'll be good to take that information and put it somewhere that you see it all the time to make it easier to memorize it. Is there anywhere you can think of that's very easy to write on that you would see at least twice a day and that would help you memorize it? Yes, Alexis, I think bathroom mirror is the best place to do it because you know you're going to be brushing your teeth at least twice a day if you have good oral hygiene. And so it's a really good place to either put post-it notes, use dry erase markers, or whatever you want to make sure, of course, that you're, giving yourself the opportunity to study when you're not really actively working on trying to study. Yeah, perfect, Mary. That's good to hear. Amino acids are so important on the new AAMC format. And remember, you not only need to know primarily the three-letter abbreviation, but turns out they actually have at least a question or two about the one-letter abbreviation for amino acids, too. That's right. Even the one-letter abbreviations. And so it's testable, not going to be frequent. You probably, yeah, I agreed, Alexis. I was confused when I saw it on their practice test. I didn't know they were going to do the one letters. I knew three-letter for sure. But yeah, it's on there too, which means, there you go as a sign. If it's on the practice test, it's going to show up on the real thing. The one thing was, it was a single question, so even if you didn't know it, you're probably fine. It's not going to ruin your score at all. But that is one of the things to be aware of. Mostly just general categories. Which ones are hydrophobic, hydrophilic. You don't need to memorize exactly what the name of each amino acid is. Just, of course, at least for the one-letter abbreviations, no categories, generally speaking. Cool. Yeah, and of course, remember as well, as Liz says, we've got 4 teachers in the room today, Liz, Chuck, Rohini, and myself. If you have any questions, you got the Q&A open the entire time. Hit us up. Let us know. even if it's not, endo questions. If you're testing in 2 days and you're wondering about, like the pencils they give you or random stuff like that, hit us up. We've all been doing this a long time. We would be very happy to kind of go through all of that kind of stuff. Main thing, is it chemi? Let me know if that's the correct way to say it. But you got it. You don't need to memorize the different number of carbons and everything. So like leucine versus isoleucine, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of whatever, but you do need to know what major structural pieces, like what's aromatic, what's non-aromatic, what's polar, what's non-polar, what's a basic, what's acidic. Which ones have sulfurs and can form disulfide bridges, cysteine. Glycine's the only one that's non-chiral. That kind of stuff's huge, but yeah, you don't need to memorize the actual carbon backbone, so it's not really worth it. For us, aspartic and glutamic acid, it's the same thing. It's a 1 carbon difference, so who cares? Exactly. Cool! I didn't know about that, Mary. That's good to know. Sporkle, I don't even know what that is. Don't put a link in though, please, if you don't mind. We just don't like using links in the chat. But if you guys want to Google that, you can probably find it. So if you just Google Sporkle. Cool. All right, so let's just jump into this kind of stuff, and we'll talk about first the 2 different major methods of hormones to affect homeostasis. But seriously, what I said about the Q&A, please let us know if you have any questions at all, even if it's not specific to endo stuff. We're super happy to talk about it. We got 4 teachers, so. All right, so let's start off talking about the major methods of endocrine homeostasis. What type of feedback is the most common type of feedback for endocrine as well as everything in the body? Yeah, negative feedback. So everything we see here is specifically referring to negative feedback. Basically, if you get too much of it, we reduce production. Generally, it's by going back and, so for example, some hormone released by maybe one of these things here, like for example, estrogen from the gonads, will then loop back to the hypothalamus and cut off production of, well, how about this? What would estrogen specifically have negative feedback against from the hypothalamus to quiz you before we even get there? Nice work, Mary. You know your stuff. GnRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone. We'll go through all that stuff later on today. But that's just one example of negative feedback. So notice this is exactly what this page is just talking about. The whole idea is that it self-regulates. And so whenever you, of course, and it's funny, this is a one-page learning goal. Whenever you get too much of something, we're going to cut off the supply by cutting off something earlier down the line. We'll see a bunch of different examples of this today. But yeah, GnRH against, the hypothalamus, or sorry, estrogen stopping the hypothalamus from releasing more GnRH is a great example. There is one that is positive feedback that you want to know for the MCAT in terms of endocrine. Anyone know what that one might be? Nice, Valerie, Maria, everyone, you got it totally. Oxytocin's the big one now, and that's the most important. Prolactin's kind of funky, Kimi, because that's the one that has the inhibitory factor, so it's different than everything else. Like, you need a hormone to stop it from being produced. But oxytocin is definitely, it's the #1 positive feedback loop, because what's oxytocin associated with? But yeah, prolactin is funky too. I do agree, it's different than the rest. Yeah, contractions. You got a baby's being born, and so of course, if you get one contraction, you don't want there to be less contractions. You want to keep getting more and more and more and more until finally the baby pops out, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Exactly. Childbirth. All right. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some specific examples. And we're going to keep looping back to that. That's just a little preview on negative feedback in all these other systems. So let's talk about water, calcium, and glucose. And so everyone's favorite, speaking of, have you taken the kidney channel class yet? Have you gone to that yet? Out of curiosity. Awesome. If you have not yet, especially if you're testing soon, check it out. It is also, it's one of my favorites. It's a good class. And so if you're testing this weekend, I recommend checking out the archives and just watching whatever it was recorded last. If you're not testing for a while, don't worry. Just make sure you get to attend it before test day, and you should be good. But a lot of this stuff is covered in that kidney class, and so let's just do a little bit of a review. So what type of hormone is ADH? Categories. Remember, this is Endo 1 review, so if this is new, remember, you might want to come to the first class always before the second, but you could figure it out. Yeah, what do we call those protein hormones? There we go, peptide hormones. So they're made of amino acids, just as any old peptide would be. All right, so we got ADH and aldosterone. I don't know if we're actually going to go down or across. Let's do both. What type of hormone is aldosterone? We'll do both because I can't remember if it goes down or across. It's a steroid hormone, exactly. And what are steroid hormones made of? What's their precursor? Just like amino acids make up peptide hormones. Cholesterol, nice work, exactly. All right, so I'm not sure which one goes first, so I'm going to first ask you what the blank is here. What makes ADH? And then we'll figure out which way it goes. You got it. It's made by the hypothalamus. There we go. It was going across, as I suspected. So it is made by the hypothalamus, but it's actually released by the posterior pituitary. Now, this is one of the kind of weird things, and since we're talking about it now, we might as well kind of get into it. I'm going to draw a cheesy little picture. Let's say this is your hypothalamus, this is your anterior pituitary, this is your posterior pituitary. I'll just draw a little guy right behind it. What type of connection do you have from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary? From the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. Nice. It's called a portal system. Basically, it's an arteriole, so it's blood. It's a hypophyseal portal system, exactly true. And so what that means is that it's going to basically release hormones in the bloodstream that will then travel through this portal into the anterior pituitary, which then tells the anterior pituitary to release something else. Conversely, the way that the hypothalamus communicates with the posterior pituitary is weird. What's the deal with it? Yeah, it's a giant axon. It's a nerve. I like it. So the way that it works is you've got this neuron, right, where you've got your cell body inside the hypothalamus. That's my little picture of dendrites there. I know they're not very pretty, but they'll work for now. And then the axon actually leaves the hypothalamus and then synapses down in the posterior pituitary, which means, yeah, what actually happens here is ADH is the one example. It's a classic example. Is made in the hypothalamus in the neuron cell body, because that's where we make things. And then it travels down the axon to be restored in the posterior pituitary, where, of course, the posterior pituitary holds on to it until it wants to use it, and then it's the guy that releases it. So it is an axonic connection. So what do you call chemical messengers that are traveling down axons? Neurotransmitters. So does that mean ADH is a neurotransmitter? Here's the weird thing. The reason I'm giving you the question is because it actually doesn't matter. It's all relative. So the way that we name things is according to where they're on the body. If you're talking about a chemical messenger that travels through the blood, you call it a hormone. If you're talking about a chemical messenger that travels through an axon, you call it a neurotransmitter. So I guess you would technically call it a neurotransmitter while it's in that axon, but once it's in the posterior pituitary, it's going to go into the blood, thus it becomes a hormone. So it's not like it's one or the other. Like, same thing with epinephrine. It's a neurotransmitter and a hormone. It just matters where it is at a moment in time is how you name it. So it's relative. That's what I mostly want you to be aware of, that it really doesn't matter. It's all relative. But do know, of course, what it refers to, right? Hormone means traveling in the blood very specifically. Exactly, yeah. So it does its action in the blood, but yeah, we call it a hormone. But beware, everything's relative. All right, so what makes aldosterone? We'll keep going down this chart as we go through. And let us know if you have questions on that weird hypothalamus pituitary thing going on over there. Nice, the adrenal cortex specifically. Nice work, Zach and Mary. So it is made by the adrenals, specifically the cortex. Where are the adrenals? They are above the kidney, exactly true. They're like the little hat that the kidney wears. You got it. So it's, of course, the top of the kidney. Nice. Which makes sense because aldosterone acts on the kidney. So it makes sense for it to be released from the thing right next to the kidney in terms of a logical location to have and keep your things. All right, so let's keep going down. So what's ADH released in response to? And this is some of the high sealed stuff today. They love aldosterone ADH. Just nice. Primarily, Mary, it is high blood osmolarity. You know, like, to be totally honest, it's true it does respond to low blood pressure as well, but it's only if it's a really, really, really dire situation. Like, if you're a healthy human, it should only respond to high blood osmolarity, thus your blood being very concentrated. The volume thing is, it's one of those kind of like how we talk about there's technically some lipases in the saliva too, even though it's like almost insignificant. Same thing here. It's like a fairly insignificant amount, but it's primarily osmolarity concentration. Yeah, I like that. That's exactly what ADH does, right? So it basically digs holes in the collecting duct, which causes the increase in what? Given what the collecting duct does, as Katie brings up, that's a great mnemonic. I've heard that one before too. I always liked it. It's associated with ADH. Antidiuretic means you absorb more water. Exactly. So you retain your water, you reabsorb water. Perfect. We'll get to the volume thing in a second, though, because that's kind of like a little bit weird. What's aldosterone released in response to? And I want to make this MCAT specific. I know in reality things are slightly more complicated. I'm going to kind of go big picture, though, because that's what the MCAT cares about more. This is low blood pressure, low blood volume. You got it. And so remember, if your blood volume is low, that means your pressure is low. You can seriously think of pressure and volume as the same thing. Like, you can't lose a bunch of blood without getting low blood pressure. It's going to come with it. There's no way really around that, which, of course, is what a major problem is working in the hospital when people start going into shock and they've been bleeding out. It's that drop in blood pressure that's going to stop blood going to the brain, and then we can go through a whole cascade of problems and death-related things that happen after that. But exactly, volume, pressure, same. So let's talk about the effect of how these things fix these problems. So as we said, ADH is always digging holes. Agreed. That's your little mnemonic there. Oh, this is weird. The pen just stopped working again. Oh no! Oh no! There we go. Sorry, I apologize. Some tech issues. There we go. The immediate effect is increasing reabsorption of water in the collecting duct. But now, what about aldosterone? And then we'll talk about the effect at the very end at the bottom here. So what's aldosterone actively do? What's its actual action? Aldosterone absorbs sodium. Nice work. So aldosterone increases the activity of the sodium-potassium pump in the nephron. Thus, you're going to reabsorb more salt. Now, here's where things get a little bit wonky, we can say. So what's ADH's effect on osmolarity or volume? What's it affect more, osmolarity or volume for ADH? It mostly affects osmolarity. You got it. So it's going to decrease plasma osmolarity. Basically, it's going to make you more hydrated, right? It's like your blood's too concentrated. It's going to help dilute it out. Aldosterone's net effect is on what? Osmolarity or volume? And remember, I know that in reality this is a little bit more complicated. We're going big picture for the MCAT. That's more about volume. So it increases blood volume, thus also increases blood pressure. Remember, we can use pressure and volume interchangeably here. So why doesn't this make you saltier if you're reabsorbing more sodium and potassium? Yeah, because water follows. Good old osmosis, of course, makes the water follow with it, and so you end up getting both. All right. Exactly. All right. So now I was going to say the Lawrence are totally on it today. So once again, though, I do want to say ADH technically will help with your blood volume a little bit. It will increase your blood volume, but it's only if you're so dehydrated that you're in serious danger. And so, like, do be aware ADH does have that same effect, but it's really, for the MCAT, you want to think osmolarity first. That's your number one go-to, because it's really shouldn't be happening in normal individuals unless you're sickly, dehydrated, and having problems. All right. Yeah, so osmolarity is concentration, so it's just how you could think of it as tonicity, right? So whether it's hypertonic, isotonic, hypotonic, right, all those terms. And so basically, if your blood is hypertonic to what it should be, that's when ADH is released to help bring in more water and kind of make yourself a bit more dilute. And that's the one thing I want you guys to keep in mind as well. Sorry, I'm really getting upset about this pen tool not functioning. Turn it back on, see if that does it. Whenever we talk about hyper or hypotonic, people tend to have this little mnemonic where they'll just say like hypotonic as like the swelling. Remember, it's all relative. And so whenever you say something is hypertonic or hypotonic, you really need to talk about what it's hyper or hypotonic to. So make sure when you get those questions, you need to read it very carefully and figure out specifically what it is that we want. Thanks, Liz. I might have you do that. I'm not sure what's going on here. All right. Cool. Oh, cool. There we go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there we go. Rohan, you got your question answered. Perfect. All right, so let's talk about glucose for a little bit. We're going to come back to this whole idea, though, of peptide and hormone, peptide versus steroid, as Esther's getting to in the chat, because that is a major part, and we will return to that concept today. All right, so what are the two major hormones, though? First, we'll keep moving along, that regulate blood glucose. Nice, Alexander. You got it. Insulin and glucagon. Those are the two big ones. And where are they released from, once again? I need to just replace the cap of this or something. The pancreas. Let's get a bit more specific. You are totally right, Mary. So specifically, what part of the pancreas are we talking about? Yeah, different types of cells in your islets of Langerhans. So which one does which? Oh, man, I'm so sad that I don't have my... Can't draw things all of a sudden. The whole world's going to fall apart. I'll try drawing it first. Actually, Liz, if you want to do some drawing too, I'm just going to write alpha, beta, delta on the screen. If you want to just write them on the right-hand side going down on a list. Nice, you got it. You guys are getting the full list. So alpha is releases glucagon. Nice. Oh, I see you're typing. Okay, I gotcha. That makes sense. Beta releases your insulin, and delta releases your somatostatin. So notice if you look at these two different things, good ninja work, Liz. Notice that it goes alphabetically for both of them. Alpha, beta, then delta. Glucagon, G comes before I in the alphabet, which comes before S in the alphabet. So if you ever forget, just remember they're both alphabetically associated. You can remember which type of cell releases which type of hormone. See, fancy little mnemonics for you. Somatostatin we don't talk about too much. The thing to be aware of in terms of somatostatin, though, is the way, basically it negates the effects of the other two. So somatostatin brings you back to the status quo. It pretty much just brings you back to baseline. So just know that about somatostatin. It's way less likely to be tested than insulin or glucagon. So let's get specific with these two because they are the predominant ones that you will see on the MCAT. How does insulin function? What does it do effectively? Bingo! So, I like it. Bunch of specifics here. You guys are right. Generally speaking, of course, if you eat a whole bunch of sugar, it's going to take the sugar out of your blood. And what's it going to do to that sugar? Other than potentially, increase some of your functions like glycolysis. For example, like turning PFK, well, activate PFK2, right? Which will then, of course, activate PFK1 and increase glycolysis. Also some control in the Krebs cycle too. But yeah, it's pretty much going to burn up glucose as well as store it as energy. And we store our glucose as glycogen. Nice work. So glucose is taken up by tissues for use, which of course brings down blood sugar. Where do we primarily store that glycogen? Like which tissues would you be not necessarily using the glucose as much as storing it? Liver's the number one. Also some of the skeletal muscles, but yeah, that's the number one go-to for that. Good call. All right. So that sugar goes, of course. We said this a second ago. But it's converted to glycogen in the liver, and that's, of course, you could also use it for fatty acids or proteins as well. Another way you can use it. We mostly, I won't get into the fatty acids and proteins. That's a metabolism 3. But mostly know when it comes to fatty acids, we're mostly talking acetyl-CoA. That's like, if there's one thing to kind of know about fatty acids, that'd probably be where it's at. But we do get very specific about those in metabolism 3. All right, so how about glucagon? Big picture first, right? We won't get too specific with the biochem here. Yeah, you have no blood sugar. You haven't eaten for a while. You are really hungry, and so your blood sugar is low, causes glucagon to be released, which then effectively does what? Breaks down your glycogen. So lysis, right? Chopping up. So of course it's going to break down your glycogen, which will then increase your blood sugar. Also, we talk about glycogen synthesis and glycogenolysis in metabolism 2. I actually just taught that about a week ago, so if you are testing soon and haven't seen it, check out that on the archive, because I don't think it's happening before your next test, before your test this weekend. Cool, it's a good one. All right, so then we already said what cells release insulin and glucagon. Pancreatic beta cells release insulin. Alpha cells release glucagon. We already covered that, and we even gave you a little mnemonic in the bottom portion of your screen. Cool. Know this stuff. Very, 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 very important. Actually, one thing before we move along here, let's talk about dysfunctions because this does show up quite a bit on the MCAT. What's the dysfunction that's related to this stuff? Like, what's the disease? Diabetes mellitus specifically, exactly true. There's also diabetes insipidus. That's more about water, aldosterone, all that kind of stuff. But you got it. Mellitus is the one that kind of deals with this. And we also have types 1 and 2, as Kimmy's bringing up as well. So which is the one where it's an autoimmune issue where you accidentally kill all your beta cells? That's type 1. They used to call it child onset diabetes, but nowadays they can't say that anymore because kids are drinking mostly soda, like carbonated, soda beverages are like the reason a lot of kids are getting diabetes. Not to make an assumption there, but that's probably the reason. So they can't call it that anymore because kids are getting diabetes type 2. Yeah, totally. Just too much sugar, like constant supply of sugar. It's terrible. But of course, diabetes type 2 is not that the cells are dead. What's the deal with diabetes type 2? What would be like one word to mostly associate that with instead? Exactly, it's obesity leak. It's sensitivity is kind of like the stand or non-responsive. Exactly, the receptors aren't working. You got it. So it's just non-responsive, insensitivity. Bunch of different ways you can describe it, but you're still producing insulin. It's just not working as well as it should. That's the deal with type 2. Perfect. There we go. Rohini's got more specifics for you in the chat. All right, so do be aware of diabetes. That does show up quite a bit. Remember, that's just diabetes mellitus. There are other types of diabetes. namely insipidus is the one we talk about. And we'll actually get into that later on when we get back into the adrenals. All right, so first, though, let's talk about hormones that relate glucose levels other than insulin and glucagon. Cortisol. Where's cortisol released from? So remember, we're not doing gland by gland. We're doing system by system here. Nice, the adrenal cortex. It is released from the adrenal cortex. Nice work. It is what's the category for cortisol? It's a type of corticoid. What type of corticoid is it? Especially given that it's relating to glucose levels, it's a glucocorticoid. You can use the word roots to break it down. Exactly true. So it's stimulated by adrenocorticotropic hormone. That's from the that's from the anterior pituitary. But that's the same thing, right? So you get a hormone from the hypothalamus, goes to the anterior pituitary. That hormone then goes to the adrenals. Then the adrenals release cortisol. So cortisol we see a lot. Main thing, at least in medicine, that you'll see it is we use it as an anti-inflammatory. Like if you got some kind of injury, they'll sometimes inject cortisol shots into it, cortisone similar, to basically stop that inflammation response. Put a bunch of sugar in the tissue, let it kind of keep doing the thing it needs to do, and not really want to heal itself. It can cause major long-term problems with chronic injections of cortisol, but it's also known as the stress hormone. That's the way to think of it. Cool, nice, cool. Epinephrine. Where's that one released from? Nice, the adrenal medulla. Totally true. So it's released by the adrenal medulla. It's your whole sympathetic nervous system, right? Fight or flight. It's the kind of thing that when, if you get, once again, allergic reaction, sometimes we'll take EpiPens to basically stop the allergic reaction from killing yourself. Or if you want to fight bears, it is a catecholamine. Exactly true. That's the category of epi and norepi. But the main thing is, you never, ever, ever want to take an epinephrine shot unless you are going to die otherwise. It's one of the most horrible experiences that most people experience ever taking it. Basically, your entire body thinks it's going to die. It's major fight or flight mode, but it stops you from dying, which is nice if you don't want to die, of course. But exactly, it's, there we go. So do be aware of that. If you want to talk word roots here too, another thing that's a little bit interesting, what's the other name for epinephrine? What's the other name for epinephrine? Adrenaline, which makes sense because adrenaline, notice it's coming from inside the adrenals. So adrenaline comes from the adrenals. And also adrenaline's a generic word for epi and norepicholine. We tend to call them both the same thing, but totally true. Also, think about it, epinephrine. What does the name tell you about where it's made? Epinephrine, huh? Wait, epi means on top of or above. Where's that nephrin come from? Oh my gosh, it's the nephrons. So the name epinephrine actually means it's coming from above the kidneys. Or, of course, adrenaline tells you it's coming from the adrenals. It's the same thing. Either way, isn't that kind of neat? Like, word roots actually do tell you a lot about the things if you actually start tying all the things together. I think it's a methyl group, Kimi. Like, seriously, it's super minimal for the MCAT. It might not be a methyl group, but it's a very, very small structural difference. They're both actually very similar to dopamine as well. They look really similar to dopamine. I think it's a methyl group. I'm not sure. But yeah, exactly. Maybe Rohini knows the specifics, but not something you need to worry about for the MCAT. They're both catecholamines. They're both associated with the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, release from the adrenals. That's all you need for the test. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that'd be more of a specific endocrine class. Might make you tell the difference, but it's, yeah, not a big deal, at least for us. Thyroxine, where's this guy released from? Thyroid, totally true. So it's produced by the thyroid gland. And if there's one thing to know about thyroxine in your thyroids, what's it most associated with? There's like one thing you would probably say it's like its main job is. And also this is stimulated once again by the adrenal, pituitary, excuse me, I keep saying adrenal, but anterior pituitary, the brain one. You've got metabolism. So basal metabolic rate, exactly. That is your thyroxine, that's your metabolism. So that's your number one. Someone that's hyperthyroid, right? They're very skinny, they can't gain weight, they're like really hot all the time, right? Whereas someone that's hypothyroid, too little thyroid, gain weight very easily, they tend to be cold all the time, kind of sluggish, hard to get moving quickly, but you got it. Metabolism is what it's all about. Cool, so of course promotes glycogenolysis, right? Breaking down, of course, your glycogen and sugar absorption by the intestines. So once again, all this kind of, like energy related stuff. All right, so that's some more sugar stuff. Let's move along to calcium for a little bit. So calcium is primarily controlled by the thyroid again and the parathyroids. Let's talk about which hormone comes from where. What is your hormone from the thyroid gland? Well, T3, T4, you got it. That's your thyroxines, the T4. but calcitonin's the other one exactly. So T3, T4, that relates to metabolism. Calcitonin's the one that relates to calcium. And then the parathyroids don't release calcitonin, they release parathyroid hormone. So parathyroids produce parathyroid hormone, and of course the thyroid produces calcitonin. So this is a classic example of a negative feedback loop. Basically, increased absorption from the bones and GI tract reduces calcium excretions of kidney excretions of calcium. So pretty much like if you're absorbing more, it means you need more. It means that you don't want to be peeing it out. So kind of classic negative feedback loop there. Its antagonist is calcitonin, which we said is produced by the thyroid gland. The mnemonic for calcitonin, anyone have a preferred mnemonic? There's one standard I've heard a bunch before. Yeah, it tones down calcium in the blood. So calcitonin tones down the calcium, whereas parathyroid hormone increases the calcium in the blood. And so there's one thing you want to be aware of, though. Your bones aren't just made of calcium. What else are your bones made of? It's a calcium blank. Minerals, phosphate specifically, exactly. So one thing I want you to be aware of here, when we go through this whole system, calcium and phosphate actually get pretty much lumped into the same category here because it's both components of your bone. And if you have a lot of phosphate and calcium in the blood, they're going to form together to make your calcium phosphate, I guess you call it molecule or salt, which then is a big part of your bone and the actual structural units there. Exactly true. All right, so what we'll do is we'll talk about calcium. Notice if you have low blood calcium, you're going to, of course, increase your calcitonin. If you have high blood calcium, you're going to try to get rid of the calcium in your blood, thus you release the calcitonin. So notice we've got basically stimulates or increases. Notice high blood calcium would mean calcitonin goes up. Low blood calcium means that parathyroid goes up. Or conversely, you could say that having lots of calcium inhibits parathyroid hormone, is what this chart's directly saying there. All right, so we're not going to get too specific about these next two things, but there is something I want you to be aware of here. And so vitamin D. Have you ever noticed that they often put vitamin D in milk? Anyone seen that before in the grocery store? Yeah, it's for a very specific metabolic, I don't know, endocrinology reason. We actually are really bad at absorbing calcium from the environment unless vitamin D is around. Exactly, increases calcium absorption, which is why they often put, same thing with orange juice, if they put calcium in the orange juice, they put vitamin D in there as well. Otherwise, you're going to drink it and just pee it out. And what's the main way that we get vitamin D normally as humans? From the sun, yeah. So the sunlight catalyzes the creation of vitamin D. You got it. Perfect. There we go. But of course, there, yeah, Lorraine's got more about the gut stuff there. So of course, it's going to cause GI calcium absorption, right, as well as phosphate absorption. Remember, we're treating calcium and phosphate as pretty much the same thing here. It has the same net effect. Both of those will either cause to increase your calcium plasma phosphate levels, and of course, calcium directly gives you more calcium in the plasma, as you can see on the top there. And so notice if you have a lot of plasma phosphate, that plasma phosphate is going to bind with the plasma calcium, forming those calcium phosphate crystals, which will then, of course, decrease the available calcium in the blood, thus effectively having a drop in calcium levels, which will then, of course, instigate parathyroid hormone from not being inhibited, which then increases the cycle and ends up kind of bringing it back around full circle. So as we said, it's another example of a negative feedback loop. And so remember, a parathyroid hormone helps activate calcium mobilization from the bone. Let's do this. What type of cell is going to mobilize calcium from the bones? It's an oste-something, right? Nice. Osteoclasts cleave bone, they break it down, right? Whereas osteoblasts do what? So build it up, exactly. So you want to know that dimer between the two. Osteoclasts cause the breakdown of bone, thus releasing more calcium into the blood. Osteoblasts build up bone, of course, create more bone. Know your class versus blast, that's very big. That's an easily tested thing to be aware of. Cool. So that brings us then full circle. Of course, high plasma calcium, right, as we know, is going to release calcitonin, and the cycle goes over and over and over and over again. Cool. And so, of course, after that, notice renal phosphate absorption. If you've got a lot of it, it'll cut that down, which, of course, then will increase your plasma phosphate levels. Speaking of, I know this is a lot of information, but it's mostly just showing that it's a negative feedback loop and how calcium and phosphate is treated pretty much the same way. Do you all know how to take screenshots? I know a lot of you have had this 1,000 times and know it. But remember, for a Mac, it's just Command-Shift-4, gives you crosshairs. If you ever want to snag, there we go. If you ever want to snag a picture when it's something pretty big and in-depth like this, feel free to take a screenshot of it. So you can either put it into notes somewhere. One thing that I do recommend to do, is to have a folder that's specific to your screenshots. And if you're really snazzy, I recommend actually labeling each screenshot from what class it was And if it's in your actual normal on-site or online class, label it with the page number as well. These don't have specific page numbers. You know, you could use the handout page number maybe, but it's just good to like have a system. You know, otherwise you'll just have a bunch of pictures that you won't know what to do with. All right, so let's do some quizzes. After this, we're going to move on to the menstrual cycle reproduction stuff, and then just have basically a summary of what we did today. So let's actually it's right here. I got it, Liz. Let's take this quiz. And I'm going to get rid of answer choice E because we don't let you say you're not sure. If you don't know, take a guess because that's what you'll do on test day. Looking fantastic. We got a patient's anterior pituitary being removed. What's going to be the least affected? Why don't you all throw out the mnemonic, our favorite mnemonic for anterior pituitary? Nice. Flat peg is my favorite of them all. Stands for FSH, LH, ACTH, TTSH. That's your flat. And then the last one is your prolactin. PE, that's endorphins. See, I don't remember. I just remember the mnemonic once you figure it out. And then G would be growth hormone, GH. So there's a reason that it's broken to these two words and we didn't choose a different mnemonic. It's namely because what is true of these top four? I'm drawing with my mouse, so it's not going to look as good as normal. I apologize. They are tropic hormones, exactly. Whereas the ones on the bottom right here, these are all your direct hormones. Nice work. They go directly to whatever it is they're going to act on. You got it. And so the only one, if we're going to remove the, I mean, you're going to be in trouble if you remove your anterior pituitary, but the only thing that's not under the control there, which we do have 83% of you going for, is insulin. Once again, where's insulin released from? Pancreas, you got it. Specifically the beta cells and the islets of Langerhans, to use your fancy language. Also, speaking of things like islets of Langerhans, there's a general movement kind of going on in science, especially in medical science, where we're trying to stop using the words like fallopian tube and instead just call it what it is, uterine tube. Same thing with like islets of Langerhans. A lot of those like name terms are kind of becoming, hopefully within the next 50, 100 years, being antiquated, and we'll start naming things for what they actually are. So you will sometimes see multiple terms referring to the same thing, such as uterine tubes or fallopian tubes. I really think it should have happened a long time ago. There's no reason to be calling something after some scientist who found it 200 years ago. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, med school they're kind of doing the same for, disease is totally true for me. There's a general movement I've been kind of perceiving going that way. So good news, I'd say. Definitely good news. Cool. All right, so, yeah, I was going to say, we have enough crap to memorize as is, right? Like, why did you memorize some dude's name who died 200 years ago? Jeez. Right, so, all right, there we go. That's, as we said, estrogen is controlled by FSH. We'll go through all the estrogen type stuff in a second here, too. Yeah, yeah. You know, they've been telling me we're going to switch to the metric system since I was in second grade. Still hasn't happened. But hopefully someday that will happen too. Just makes so much more sense. All right, so as I said, the last major learning goal today is we're going to spend a bunch of time doing the hypothalamus axis, and then we'll do a little recap kind of thing. But this will be the main last thing we talk about today in terms of major content areas. All right, so let's talk about females first, sexual development. Where does everything begin, first and foremost? Hypothalamus. Remember, the hypothalamus is like the master gland. It's the thing that's in charge of everything. It releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone. I know that looks like it's pineal gland. That's a little bit different. We won't get into pineal gland today. Well, let's say the one thing. So if there's a hormone to know associated with the pineal gland, what is the hormone to know that's associated with the pineal gland? Melatonin. You got it. For the MCAT, if you just know pineal melatonin, you're probably going to be fine. There is some very interesting stuff out there about the pineal gland and like theories about it and stuff like that if you want to do some research. But for the MCAT, just think melatonin. Yeah, exactly. Sleepy time, circadian rhythms type stuff, and you'll be totally good. But there is some really cool stuff out there if you want to do some research. All right, so hypothalamus, it's the master gland. It releases GnRH, which then goes to the what? Anterior or posterior pituitary. If it's a hormone leaving the hypothalamus, got to be the anterior, remember, because the only portal system goes to anterior. Posterior has got an axonic connection directly. All right, so that causes FSH and LH to be released. We'll talk about the specific order in which these two things happen. They both effectively, though, go down to the ovaries to produce two different hormones. What are our two main hormones here? Estrogen and progesterone. Nice work. And so FSH leads to estrogen being released by the follicle as it develops, as well as the name suggests, follicle-stimulating hormone. It stimulates the follicle to develop. LH, luteinizing hormone, it activates the luteal phase, and it starts when we'll kind of get into it and talk about the corpus luteum and all that kind of stuff in a sec here. But that's the big picture of all the hormones that relate. All right, so the thing that we started off class talking about today was this exact same negative feedback loop, right? So remember, when estrogen is produced by the ovaries, it loops back to the hypothalamus and cuts off the supply of GnRH. So you don't get, well, namely, so you don't have like 7 eggs develop at the same time, because no one wants to have more than 2 babies usually, because it's very difficult to take care of more than 2 babies at the same time. And so that's why that negative feedback exists. And it is a human-specific thing. Some mammals don't have that same kind of feedback because they do get lots of eggs to develop. But you don't get tested on that kind of stuff at the MCAT, so I would focus on the human stuff. It's way higher yield. So this is where things get kind of cool, and this is exactly what we were talking about. GnRH activates the pituitary to release FSH. FSH acts on the ovary to release estrogen. And as that follicle matures and develops, that estrogen is released, and of course it causes negative feedback against the hypothalamus. One thing we didn't mention yet is that estrogen actually causes vascularization and building up of the uterine wall, which is very important because if you want a baby to implant there, you got to have a nice, like vascularized tissue there to have a lot of blood supply to actually give it the nutrients and resources that it needs. Cool. Nice mnemonic, Mary. Check it out. Estrogen establishes the uterine wall. We'll talk about the other hormone that maintains it in a little bit. All right, so now that's the very beginning. So notice though, oops, sorry, I apologize. I keep trying to use my pen tool and it keeps not working. So why in the world, if it's initially going to inhibit the hypothalamus, why would it switch around and then actually start to activate the hypothalamus later on? Like, why would that make sense? Because that seems really weird and it's actually very complicated. I did a lot of research on it last summer and mostly learned there were 2 different types of receptors, which is why you can have this weird dual system going on. Yeah, exactly, because what's LH under the control of? What controls the release of LH? Still. GnRH, you got it. The hypothalamus is still in charge, right? And so in order for the anterior pituitary to do stuff, it's got to get the signal from the hypothalamus. And in order to get the signal from the hypothalamus, you got to activate the stimulus, hence the positive sign there, to basically kick off that surge in LH. And so that happens right about day 14. And also, just to set things straight, remember that considering day 0 is, of course, menstruation. So people like to think that menstruation is at the end of the cycle. No, if you're talking about day 1 of menses, that's the first day of the cycle. If day 14 is the LH surge and ovulation. There's people kind of go back and forth on that, and I spent a lot of time talking to a reproductive biology PhD friend of mine, and we geeked out, and she said, no, it's definitely day 1, and I have believed it ever since. All right, so that's the LH surge right on day 14, causes the follicle to do what? Rupture, explode, exactly. And then, of course, what leaves that follicle? Or you say drop to, that's the same idea. Well, 2 things. So basically, the egg or the ovum then leaves the follicle, and the leftover follicle becomes this thing called the corpus luteum. So notice this phase is broken into 2 main chunks. The first half of the phase is the follicular phase, where the follicle follicular is developing. There's lots of FSH in the follicular phase as well. On day 14, we enter the luteal phase. That's where luteinizing hormone starts to surge. The corpus luteum, of course, is secreted. And of course, this is why it's the luteal phase itself. All right, so now the follicle, we basically, as we said, ruptures. You get the egg, you get the corpus luteum. What's the so I guess I clicked on it a little bit early. So the corpus luteum releases progesterone. So remember, estrogen establishes, using Mary's mnemonic, I like that mnemonic, the endometrial wall. Progesterone maintains it. It stops it from getting sloughed off. So progesterone is essential. All right, so now we got to talk about pregnancy. So, look at that, Mary, back for the win with the mnemonics. You got it. So if there is a fertilization, the baby starts to release HCG. HCG acts on what? HCG then, that's human chorionic gonadotropin. It's the embryo starts to release it. It acts on the, not the placenta eventually it gets to there, but it's not actively on the placenta. It's actually on the corpus luteum. It's actually on the corpus luteum itself. So progesterone stops the corpus luteum from atrophying and dying. So because the whole idea is if we get like a little picture here, I'm gonna show this image right here. Let's use this. But so the whole idea is if you look at the end of the cycle, notice that this would be non-pregnancy. This is your, I'm just gonna label this to use it as a teaching opportunity. So that's your progesterone right there. If there isn't a pregnancy, your progesterone levels naturally drop because the corpus luteum actually atrophies and dies without that stimulus of HCG from the embryo. If we do have HCG, this progesterone level stays high, this estrogen level stays high, and then you're basically just pregnant. That's how it is. But so do be aware of that. Like, yeah, the only reason we have progesterone in the beginning is that corpus luteum releasing progesterone. Now, interesting factoid. Did you know that HCG stops being produced after the first trimester? So HCG is no longer produced after the first trimester. And that's because you no longer need the corpus luteum. What produces enough progesterone at that point? Yeah, you got it, Catherine. It's exactly true. The placenta does. So placenta is big, developed, and strong at that point, so we can produce its own progesterone and be totally fine. But Catherine's got a great point there. Home pregnancy tests test for HCG. So, and it's actually released within a couple times. So the thing is, though, if you take one of those home pregnancy tests, if you've already been pregnant for 3 months, it will tell you that you are not pregnant. Exactly, which is kind of freaky. Yeah, I'm not sure about length. I don't know that one, Mary. I haven't seen the ones that actually determine length. So yeah, that's a good question. I haven't seen that before. But yeah, that's kind of the general idea, though. Yeah, I was going to say, the bump will generally tell you, as Rochelle's saying, hopefully, but we've all seen those TV shows where people have babies and they didn't realize they were pregnant. Some people just don't. I don't know. All right, so yeah, it actually doubles every 2 or 3 days, I think it is, Alexis, so it's pretty high. I hear it's also the cause of morning sickness, is actually that HCG, which is also why morning sickness goes away after the end of the first trimester, too. It's like it all comes together. HCG, causing lots of problems. All right, so as we said, if you get the zygote, HCG is released, stops it from atrophying, whereas if you don't get pregnant, then the corpus luteum atrophies, dies, progesterone levels drop, and then, of course, menstruation occurs as the uterine lining sloughs off. Cool. Yeah, Lauren, I've heard that too. I don't know what the deal is with that, but I recently heard that they were using it as a new weight loss med, and I was like, really? That seems kind of crazy. I'm sure there's some logical reason behind it, but yeah, maybe. Sure, I mean, if you get into it, I'm sure we could figure out a way, but we'll hit us up in the Q&A if you want to do some brainstorming, because I bet we could probably figure out how if we thought about it enough. Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. All right, let's, instead of just labeling, well, how about this? I'll actually clear this out. I'll let you guys answer this, and then we can move along to our next step. Oh, actually, yep, this was, oh, we'll talk about males, and then we'll do the recap, so we're right near the end, actually. Try to make the pen work again. It is broken. Oh, there we go. Sweet. Functioning again. Oh, never. Well, we'll see. I'm going to break this in half. So as we said, the first side is the follicular phase. The second side is the luteal phase. And so we do have about 80% going for the right answer. You guys are right. Notice that the luteal phase is kicked off by a surge in LH. So then what do you think A is? Let's go through the whole list here because you definitely want to be comfortable with this graph. It's actually FSH. Why do we know that FSH is going to happen before estrogen? Why would you have FSH first? Bingo, exactly. There we go, because it's FSH that stimulates the follicle to develop and then start to, of course, oh, sorry, I just moved that over too, to release estrogen. There we go. Perfect. So then estrogen, of course, would be which one? Using that, notice the one that rises in response. Oh, no. My pen stopped working again. Okay, I'm not going to type it. Sorry for the random pen failure today. Estrogen. You got it, would be B. So B is estrogen, and then finally D would be which? That's your progesterone, exactly. So notice at the end of the cycle is when estrogen and progesterone drop, and that's when menstruation occurs. One thing I guess we didn't talk about yet is birth control. So birth control works how? How does birth control work? Yeah, it keeps progesterone. Actually, it's estrogen and progesterone levels high. And so if you have estrogen and progesterone levels both high, it not that it protects the egg from the sperm. It's actually more think about what would be inhibited if you have high levels of estrogen and progesterone. See, Rohini thought I was going to say what's that word called again? Abstinence. She thought I was going to say abstinence. But exactly. So it's going to inhibit, I forgot the word for it, but it's going to inhibit what again? If you have high levels of estrogen, what will the negative feedback be against? And Esther's got it right there. It's going to stop GnRH. And if you don't have GnRH, your follicle's not going to develop and you're not going to ovulate in the first place. So like kind of structurally speaking, by having high levels of estrogen and progesterone, your body would think you're already pregnant, which means that you're not going to ovulate because there's no reason to ovulate if you're already pregnant. Which is also why, generally speaking, when you take birth control, the first 21 days of the month, you take the actual estrogen progesterone pills, and there's a bunch of different combinations of the two. But then the last 7 days, you take a placebo. And so the placebo is to mimic this exact same dropping in levels that occurs at the end of the month when you no longer have estrogen and progesterone coming down. And so if you don't take those placebos, then you don't menstruate because you have that same constant high levels across. Cool. One more interesting thing that I want to bring up that I want you to think about, evolutionarily, did you know that when you're pregnant or non-pregnant, people tend to be attracted to different types of smells? And one system that people actually they say is evolutionary favorable is that we tend to like the way that people smell if their immune systems are a lot different than our own. Which makes sense because basically if you have very different types of immune systems, the children are more likely to have more varied immunity, diversity, exactly. So if you're taking birth control and your body thinks that you're pregnant, you're going to be attracted to the wrong kind of people. So then the babies won't have as good of immune systems as if you weren't on birth control when you met the person in the first place. Uh-oh, you got it. So there we go, Lauren. So you might notice if you're on birth control, you might be being attracted to the wrong people. I don't want you to think about it too much, but it is the kind of stuff that shows up in the MCAT because it's combining endocrinology and immunology all in the same place, and they'd love to really combine the topics together, so that's a cool thing to think about. All right, one last thing in terms of content, then we'll do a little recap before we get out of here. So the one thing we didn't talk about yet was the fellas. And so we've only covered female reproduction. The nice thing about male reproduction is that it's a lot easier, it's more straightforward, and there's only one slide we have for the entirety of it, so we'll get through it pretty quickly. But so it's the same thing as females. Once again, the hypothalamus is the master gland. It releases GnRH, which goes to the anterior pituitary, which releases FSH and LH as well. We just don't have follicles so much, and we don't really have follicular and luteal phases. Instead, the testes produce two reactions in response. FSH triggers spermatogenesis. LH leads to basically testosterone, and then, of course, the release of testosterone, which is essential for male development. So here's the interesting thing. If we know that FSH is what triggers spermatogenesis, would it be possible to make a male birth control? Sure is. How would you inhibit FSH? All you got to do is inhibit it. So how could you inhibit FSH? What would you need to stop first? You got it. Let's inhibit GnRH. So wait a second. Since we're all humans and most of our glands work very similarly, how would you inhibit GnRH? Once again, negative feedback. What's the end product of the game here? The end product will make it easier. You could have too many side effects if you increase LH. Well, men don't naturally produce too much estrogen, so all you got to do is use testosterone. So if you actually inject men daily with testosterone, small doses, just like female birth control works for females, it works perfectly fine. It's actually already been shown. It's 99.9% effective, I think, or 99.8 or whatever it is. Totally works great. Basically, it's true. So it works the exact same as female birth control. If you give males daily injections of testosterone, it works as birth control. The problem is it has never gone to market, and it's actually now finally in clinical trials in the FDA because exactly, first of all, when they basically brought it to the masses and did the trial runs to see if it would work, Men didn't want it to exist. They rather have females deal with it. And females didn't trust males enough to take it, so they said, no, we'd rather that just not exist. And so that's why it's still not on the market. But it will be in the next 3 years, I hear. So it should be out pretty soon. And so you will actually, in the next couple years, hear male birth control on the market, I hear. I last heard it was in trials a couple years ago, so it should be pretty soon. Yeah, right? So things to know about humans, how it works, right? All right, so that is your endocrinology, birth control, sex ed talk, as Rohini likes to say. Before we go, though, I do want to give you guys a couple basically summary slides. As I said, the passage is homework for today, so we do have that passage. This is what I want to end class with. This is our final learning goal, which is just basically the list of the major hormones associated with each gland. The only reason I wanted to show you this, it's a recap of everything we've already talked about today. I just wanted to give it to you as a nice little screenshot. If you are working on memorizing and want to put some stuff on the bathroom mirror, I'll give you a little bit to screenshot each of these. There's about 3 slides. Mary, the number one effect that I heard was that it increases sex drive. That was the only thing that was very significant, but that's like from the research I read on it, which people were super upset about. All right, next one, we got this guy right here. We talked about posterior pituitary. We talked about ADH and aldosterone. We also talked about thyroid as well as the parathyroid glands as well. Cool. And then finally, that is actually possible, Esther. There is definitely male lactation that occurs. And then the last things that we talked about here was the adrenals, the pancreas. Once again, just for a quick screenshot, I wanted to kind of show you guys a little summary slide of all the things that we talked about. And there's the last one there with the gonads and the pineals. Even melatonin covered. All right, well, I hope you all had a lot of fun and learned and enjoyed sex ed class for today. If you want to hang around in about 4 minutes, I'm going to be jumping into spectroscopy and organic lab techniques. So stick around for more MCAT channel. If not, I will see you in future sessions, and have a good rest of your evenings.